Hi, good morning. My name is Jamie Roice-Gomes, manager of the Living with Fire program, and welcome to the Living with Fire virtual series. This is session number 7, the home hardening Q&A, and I am co-hosting this with Amanda Malici. Amanda, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Amanda. I'm the Fire Adapted Communities Coordinator for Tahoe Resource Conservation District and the Tahoe Network of Fire Adapted Communities. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you. We're happy that you're here too. And so again, this workshop is different from previous workshops that we have been doing in the sense that this is only a question and answer session. And so we hope that folks have viewed a previous recording of home hardening, but let's get into this. We are going to be going over some housekeeping, then we will do a pre-workshop poll, and then we will get to the question and answer stuff, and then we'll do a post-workshop evaluation. So this is the screen that you will see. The mute button is on the bottom left. We just ask that folks please mute yourselves. And hosts do have the ability to mute you, just in case you're wondering who muted you. It might be us. Here's the video button. If you want, you can turn off your video. We usually ask folks to turn off your video for streaming purposes, but we don't have a presentation besides this one. So if you'd like to turn it off, go ahead. And then this is where we're going to ask that folks please ask your questions. You would click the chat button. Then there's going to be a drop-down menu, and you could see the questions for speakers. You're going to click on questions for speakers and type in your questions to that individual. And that's going to be Dr. Christina Rostrano. And then she's going to send those to me, and then I will ask. And then, do you guys see my notes, or do you see?
Yeah, I see the notes.
Oh, oops, sorry. Okay. Let me fix that. From current slide.
Looks good.
Okay. Oops. And then, of course, at the bottom right-hand corner is the leave the workshop button. If you want to leave the workshop. Again, we're going to have the post poll, evaluation poll at the end. And then we will end the session. And then, of course, if we were in person, we would have this poster. Basically just states that extension programs are federally funded. Our programs are open to everyone, and there is a USDA contact in there if you would like. If you have any other questions, you can always email us at lwf@unr.edu. Okay. So I'm going to ask that somebody please start the pre-workshop poll. Okay, so we're just going to ask folks to just fill out this pre-workshop poll. It gives us an idea of where you live. It also gives us an idea of your affiliation, if you're a landowner, a homeowner. Then we just want to understand your knowledge base. Have you attended or viewed any sort of home hardening presentation before? And do you have a good understanding of home hardening? So we'll just leave this up here for a few more seconds. All right, let's see. Are folks done? Okay, I'm going to end that poll. Okay, so it looks like a majority of folks are from California, not within the Tahoe Basin. About 39% of you are, and then 30% of you are from Nevada, and 13% of you are from the Lake Tahoe Basin. Got some folks from Idaho, Oregon, Washington, and other states. Great to have you guys. Affiliation, 48% of you are homeowners. And we got some landowners, renters, and agency staff, land management folks, and others classified as other. It looks like a majority of you have viewed or attended some sort of home hardening presentation, 65% of you. And do you have a good understanding of home hardening? About 57% of you said yes, which is great. Okay. I'm going to exit out of that. Thanks to everybody for doing those polls. Now, again, we asked folks to please type in your questions to the questions for speakers person, and then they'll email that to me just to limit confusion of people talking over each other. And so just to give you an opportunity to be able to type those questions in, we're going to be asking the speaker a question, but first let me introduce him. Okay, our speaker is Dr. Steve Corles. He is an Emeritus advisor from University of California Cooperative Extension, and he's a retired chief scientist for the Wildfire and Durability Insurance Institute for Business and Home Health Research Center. I always mispronounce IBHS's name, so I had to read it off. But please welcome Dr. Steve Corles. Uh-oh, you're muted.
Thanks, sorry. Thanks for the opportunity to be here and for the invitation. While you're writing some of your questions in, I'm just gonna take a minute to talk about this home hardening issue, why it's important. So home hardening is a general term given to things you do to your home to help it resist wildfire exposures. Wildfire exposures, predominantly ember, but also radiant heat and the worst of all is direct flame contact. I think it's important just to remember though that homes survive wildfires because of things that happen to your home, but also things that happen to and on your property. So it's a coupled approach. You do things on your property that sort of minimize the chance of fire burning directly to your home. And then you do things to the home and near the home to help your home resist an ember exposure. So these embers are, they can result in spot fires, and when they land on, near, or next to your house, they can ignite things that are on your house or near your house, and that can result in a direct flame contact exposure to the house or a radiant heat exposure to the house that can ignite siding, break glass in a window, ignite a deck, and these kind of things. And so that's generally what we're trying to do, is to make changes to your home and your property that can help it resist wildland fire. So I think with that, I'll try to answer your specific questions as they come in. So Jamie, or do we have any that we can start with?
Yeah, let me stop sharing my screen. And then I always, I was wondering if you could actually talk about the percentages of homes that ignite from ember ignition too, while I pull up the email of these questions.
Sure. So there's been a number of post-fire studies that have attributed home ignitions to various causes, and these post-fire studies have indicated that between 60 and 90% of home ignitions are resulting from ember ignitions. So I say that, but I think it's important to sort of clarify what that includes. So ember ignitions can be embers igniting the home directly. So if you have a wood shake roof, if you have a wood deck, for example, the embers can ignite that with the help of nothing else, no debris or anything. Embers can do that by themselves. If you have an open window, embers can enter into your living part of your house and ignite combustibles there. So that's one kind of ember ignition, and I call that direct ember ignition. So the embers do it by themselves without the help of anything else. But the other critical part of ember ignition is what I call indirect ember ignition, and that's where they might ignite a wood pile. They might ignite bark mulch next to your house, and these kind of indirect ember ignitions I think are really important, and they ultimately result in a direct flame contact exposure to the home or radiant heat exposure to the home and do what those things do. So ember ignitions, this 60 to 90% includes both direct ember ignition scenarios and indirect ember ignition scenarios. And that's why this coupled approach is so important, because ignition of a wood pile, ignition of a broom on your deck, ignition of patio furniture, that results in radiant heat or flames touching your home. It may look like flames or radiant heat, but it's caused by the ember, and that's why we sort of combine these things. And that's also though why ember ignitions have such a high proportion of ignitions overall, because of the ember, of the direct and the indirect parts of ember ignition.
Great point. Thanks, Steve. Okay. First question. I didn't get a chance to watch the recording. What is the most vulnerable component on a house to consider when hardening my home, and why?
So this is a great question, and it's sometimes a difficult question to answer, but I think typically you would say that the most vulnerable part of your home would be the roof, because it's such a large horizontal or relatively horizontal area that it can receive a lot of embers. And so in particular, if you have a complex roof, so if you have a roof where roof meets a wall, so you have a split level home or a home with a dormer or a valley in your roof, that's called a complex roof. And complex roofs just result in a lot of places where embers can accumulate. And so if you look at your roof and you look at where debris accumulates, where you have to clean needles or leaves off your roof often, these are the same places where embers are going to accumulate. And if you have a wood shake roof, of course, then it's fair game for anywhere on your roof for these embers to collect and ignite. But if you have, even if you have a Class A roof and you have a lot of debris on the roof, then these embers will ignite that debris, and it'll be the thing next to the roof and not the roof itself, so to speak. So it could be the siding next to the roof, or debris in a gutter next to the roof, things like that, that would make this roof more important and more vulnerable. Similarly, because your deck can be a relatively large horizontal surface, then your deck can also be vulnerable to ignition by embers, particularly if you have a lot of combustibles on the deck, if you store your wood pile on your deck. And the deck also, you have to sort of consider the under part of the deck where you might store stuff, and you don't really want to store stuff under there that's combustible. So, I would say roof is the most important thing to address, and then the deck can be. But when you think about this, not to dwell on this too much, but horizontal surfaces where embers can land, so that whole area around your home where you might have combustible things, whether it be bark mulch or a lot of vegetation, these things can collect embers and result in ignition. So these horizontal-ish surfaces where embers can collect are pretty important.
Yeah, when I talk to folks about this, I like to bring up the example, if you have a wood shake or shingle roof, it's as similar to having hundreds of pounds of kindling just laying on your roof. So I like that example. Let's see, another question. Let me make sure that I mark these questions so I don't okay. I live on a gentle slope about 10%, and I have to rebuild a fence downslope of my house, as well as keeping my dog in. I thought to rebuild the fence of appropriate materials to stop a grass fire that might march upslope toward my house. Can you comment on what materials / type of fence might be the best to install? I would be building about a 4-foot high fence. I realize that a small fence is not going to stop a crown fire in trees or anything.
Correct. So, I mean, that's a good observation. A 4-foot high fence will not stop any crown fire. If you are in grassland, though, without trees around, or you've taken precautions so that a crown fire is unlikely to occur, then a 4-foot high fence can do a fair amount to deflect fire burning up slope. But that fence, so to speak, would be more of a retaining wall. That would be a concrete poured wall or a metal fence that is a sort of a solid metal fence. Those are probably your best options, but those can be cost prohibitive. They're definitely more expensive. So when it comes to other kinds of combustible fencing, you have basically 2 options. Well, you can use a chain link fence. So would be affordable, but it's not going to stop any fire. It's just going to keep your pets in, and it won't contribute, but it won't stop the fire from burning up the slope. So if you're looking for something that can stop the fire from burning up slope, and not a crown fire, as you accurately note, you are looking at non-combustible options that are going to be more expensive, lightly concrete. I mean, a concrete retaining wall, or a metal fence of sorts. You can also build a stucco clad wall, but I think that's probably beyond what you want to do. If you're looking at a wooden kind of a wall, a wood fence, then I would also suggest that isn't going to be stopping any kind of fire moving upslope. It's not going to stop them. So you need to just make sure you have good defensible space there. From an ember ignition perspective, you would want what I call a good neighbor fence. That's where the planks alternate. So the adjacent planks are offset by the width of the horizontal boards that you're nailing your fence to. If you go back and forth, then that fence is less vulnerable to ember ignition, because there isn't a particular ledge to land on where the embers are likely to stay put. If you have a privacy fence where all the planks are on one side, then the embers will stay put because they have something to hold them there. The good neighbor fence is more porous, so to speak, so the embers tend to push through. The other thing to not lose track of is that, and if you have a pet, this can be a challenge, but you want to keep debris from accumulating at the base of the fence, because that ignited material will and can exacerbate the burning of a combustible wood fence, for example. So keep debris out from there. Some people don't like this because their dog, for example, might want to dig under it, but to the extent you can raise the fence up and keep debris out from underneath that fence, the better off that fence is going to perform.
Okay, I'm trying to group questions together. We got a good amount of questions, which is awesome.
Right.
We're going back to, I'm sorry.
Just to add one more thing about that fence.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I mean, well, I just thought of it, and it's sort of an important point that probably will come up later, but this is a fence that's well away from the house. if that fence winds around and touches the house, then it definitely want a non-combustible section. So a metal or chain link, some sort of metal non-combustible fence, you know, within 5 to 8 feet of your house. You want it to be a non-combustible thing. Sorry, keep on going.
Yeah, no worries. My fence right next to my house just blew down, and so I thought it was a great opportunity to put a metal fence in. Okay, let's go back to let's go back to roofs. Here's a question: are all metal roofs considered Class A roofing? In the guide, it says not all are, and I'm wondering what the differences are.
So I think there's 3 kinds of metal that we can consider when you're talking about roofing. One is steel, the other is copper, and the third is aluminum. So aluminum is the metal roof covering that you need to worry about the most. Aluminum's melting point is pretty low, relatively speaking. And so in order to have a Class A aluminum roof, you need to have some underlying fire resistant materials. And there's a couple of options out there. One is a fiber gypsum product. There's a few options. You can just use a roll roofing product underneath the aluminum if you're going that route. I think aluminum roof coverings are less popular than they used to be. So and copper is a fairly expensive roof covering. So the most common covering these days would be steel. And if you're doing steel, then it can be Class A. There is a Finnish product called VersaShield. It's a product made by a roofing company called GAF. And you can use this as an underlayment for the metal roof covering, particularly if you have a corrugated metal roof. Then I think you might want to use something like the VersaShield product, because it is a reinforcement for embers that can get between the roof covering and the roof deck in this case. But if you have a standing seam metal roof, there aren't openings between the roof covering and the roof deck, you're less likely to have ember issues underneath the deck in that situation. But just to restate the answer to your particular question, aluminum is the thing you need to worry about. If you have a steel or copper roof, then that is Class A. You can look, I mean, the roof manufacturer should be quite willing to give you the results of a fire test that demonstrates the fire rating of the roof, and that report will tell you if you need any additional materials in the roof assembly to get that Class A fire rating. So if you're uncertain about a particular brand, ask that company for a copy of their fire test, and it would be an ASTM E108 test, and it'll tell you whether it's a Class A, and if it is a Class A, whether it requires additional fire resistant materials underneath the roof covering, but above the roof deck, so to speak. So I would, if you're uncertain, request that report.
Sorry. Okay, in the same form with just talking about metal, this individual is wondering if they can put a metal or steel siding on their house over their wood siding in addition to metal roof to help mitigate the risk.
Good question. So you're asking whether you can use a roofing product like corrugated roof covering, use it in a vertical application covering combustible wood siding. I think the answer is yes, you can do that. It would be an easier thing if you have a wood siding product that has a flat profile. So a tongue and groove, a shiplap kind of profile, or if you're putting it over like a T111 plywood kind of siding, because that results in a flat profile, you'll have less of an issue in terms of having a flat wall with this new thing put over it. But if you have a bevel siding product where you when you run your hand up the wall, you hit bumps, on the way up. I think it's a heavier lift because you're going to end up with a wobbly wall that way with a new thing over it. And if you're doing it over a flat surface wall, you probably want to add a house wrap kind of a product, so that you'll have a drainage plane between the wood siding and the metal siding, so it's a place for water to go that doesn't absorb right into the wood that you're covering up. So you can do this, over the entire surface. What I've seen more commonly is to put it as a wainscoting, so like part way up the wall, just to protect the bottom portion of the wall. And then you need to do a detail above the non-combustible part so that water doesn't directly get behind that metal part that you're adding. And it would just be like a detail piece for aesthetic, but it also has a functional purpose also.
Okay. This individual says, we've seen long-lasting smoky conditions and poor air quality in Carson City and Reno this summer. Can that smoke cause damage to homes? If so, what does that damage look like? And does it pose fire safety risks?
So I think it's mostly a health thing from breathing air. And if the smoke is inside your house, there are some cleaning things that can be done. This kind of a question actually is better addressed to someone that knows more about health issues, and that person isn't me. So like an industrial hygienist would be someone to talk to. There are certified industrial hygienists, or just industrial hygienists, but I think if you have particular questions, why don't you send an email directly to Jamie and she'll forward it to me, and then I can give you some more specifics, but I would have to sort of look up. But there are industrial hygienists around. I'm sure there are some in the Reno area, Tahoe Basin area, but that is more that kind of a question.
So again, I'm going to put it out here. If you guys have any additional questions, you can always email us at lwf@unr.edu. And if you do have any sort of like health questions in smoke, you can always check out airnow.gov. We're, interestingly enough, Living with Fire is working with the Washoe County Health District, and we're working on a wildfire smoke preparedness fact sheet. So we're learning a lot. We're in the process of that. That cool information is coming out soon. Okay, let me find the next one. Where is the safest place to store your vehicle during a wildfire? In the garage of your home, or as far from your home as possible?
So I would say the answer to that can be both of those. Inside your garage is a perfectly fine place to store your vehicle, assuming that you've done things to your garage to make it, if it's an attached garage or a detached garage, doesn't really matter. If it's a detached garage, then you want to protect it from the fire. And if it's an attached garage, similarly, you want to make sure your home is able to resist the wildland fire. But so inside the garage is a perfectly good place. There are a lot of examples of ignited vehicles, RVs, boats, igniting the home. So parking the car right next to your home isn't the best place. So if it's not inside your home, like inside the garage, then away. Unless you want it near to because you're getting ready to evacuate. That's sort of a different thing. But if you're leaving it there and you're evacuating, then inside or away are the better places.
And then I'll add to that, you just want to ensure that, let's say that your home is destroyed and you have your vehicle in your garage. We've seen cases where, homeowners insurance isn't going to cover if your vehicle has burned. So just make sure you have the appropriate insurance to cover. We're going to go to a question about garages. I have a solar battery backup system tied into the grid and an electric car in the garage. What are the implications for batteries in the garage in the event of wildfire? My understanding is that electric car fires and battery fires are particularly hot and hard to extinguish. What can be done to mitigate this risk?
So I think the best thing, those things that you point out are correct. But you just don't want your house to ignite. If your house ignites, then everything in it is going no matter what. And I don't think it's going to matter as much once the house ignites. The heat from the burning car definitely will be there. But your house is, if no one is there to defend it, then your house will likely be lost once it ignites. So I would do things to minimize the chance that home ignition occurs in the first place.
Okay. How can folks take into account pet installations like doggy doors and dog houses when retrofitting homes against wildfire?
Another good question. So I think, the issue is wind blowing the doggy door open and ember entry and that kind of scenario. Our doggy door has a metal plate that can be inserted. And I think so that's a pre-evacuation thing that you would do, or when wildfire is threatening, you would, put that metal door in place so that the flapper can't move because you have the metal door in place. So that would be the doggy door, and it would also apply to a cat door also. Similarly, dryer vents, metal dryer vents that are flappers are better than the that are only open when the dryer is running. Those kind of vents openings are the better approach. But your pet door, I think, the only thing I can really think of is the metal door that you insert when wildfire is threatening, and then maybe it's a little more inconvenient for you and your pet, but I think that's the best option, given the fact that you want them to enter and exit at other times, on their own.
I like that recommendation. I actually have a plastic doggy door cover, and I'm always worried it's going to break, and then we have to try to figure out how to figure out a new cover. Are there any fire hardening practices that are not required by code, but you feel should be or will be someday?
So these would be, thanks again, these would be what I would call code plus kind of things. And there are a number of code plus items that you could do that aren't currently code. Some of these things are becoming code, but your jurisdiction has to have a building code to begin with. So California has a building code. Northern Nevada generally has a building code. So the parts of Northern Nevada that I know about, and that's sort of where you are. There is a code. So, but these code plus things often deal with ember resistant strategies or mitigation strategies. So this would be things like if you have wood siding and it goes all the way to the ground or all the way to the deck, these are places where embers accumulate pretty readily and can ignite that combustible siding. And so some of the things that you can do there, and the same thing would apply to roof to wall intersections, particularly where you have a combustible siding, would be to insert a metal flashing at the base of the wall. This is sort of becoming into code, but it's not code everywhere. When you do this metal flashing detail, you need to make sure that water can't get behind the metal flashing, because then you'll have a rot problem. So you have these kind of things that you can do, but you need to be careful about it. Another code plus item, if you have a wooden deck in particular, and this is much easier to do if your deck boards are parallel to your home, is to remove the deck board closest to your home and replace it with either a metal grate or a metal deck board. This particular idea is in the home retrofit guide that Christine and I and others wrote, and it's been recently published. So I think maybe if you can put a link to that in the chat, because this particular thing is in there. I think some of the other code plus things that you might want to think about are not necessarily code plus, but they are cherry picking the code options. So the building code often allows for a range of products that go from combustible to non-combustible, and if they're combustible, they pass a particular test, for example. But you can choose to just pick the most stringent of the options that are available. And although whereas that's not code plus, it's providing the greatest protection. As an example, you can have a vinyl gutter or a metal gutter. I think it's arguable that a metal gutter is a better choice. It's easier to put a gutter cover on it and the like. So you can choose those kind of things also. And I would be remiss if I don't say this. It's not code yet, and it's not really a building thing, but a non-combustible zone around your home and under the footprint of your deck is really a good idea, because it minimizes the opportunity for ember ignitions to occur. This horizontal non-combustible zone is nominally 5 feet. Give it what you can, but it has to be accompanied by a 6-inch vertical where the ground meets the siding, where the deck meets the siding, because those areas where embers are going to accumulate, and you want non-combustible things for those embers to land on and in. And so rock mulch as opposed to bark mulch, concrete foundation as opposed to wood siding, these are the things that you want those embers to land against and accumulate against.
Good point. That runs into another question. This individual has gravel and rocks in a 1-foot perimeter around their house, but it's very hard to remove the pine needles that collect in that area. What's the best material or size gravel to use in this area to make it easy to remove pine needles?
That's a wonderful question again. I think there's a lot of this non-combustible zone is new enough that some of the specific recommendations for it in terms of recommendations that minimize the maintenance requirement to the homeowner, these are things that aren't really quite clear yet. I would say that large, maybe 1 inch or 3/4 inch to 1 inch kind of rock might be easier to deal with, because you can more easily scrape it away. But it is unfortunate, I think, from the homeowner's perspective that some of these sort of small detail questions, I think, aren't known in a way that you can give sort of rock solid advice. What is clear is the importance of this near your home area in terms of its importance in minimizing imbrignations of your home. The less clear is how much maintenance is it going to require for you to maintain that kind of a thing. I don't know. At this, I mean, maybe Christine has something to say here, because
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to add from my own experience around my home, what we do, it is a real pain to clean the pine needles in that 0 to 5 foot zone. And so we've actually built a screen. So it's 2x4s on also. So it's a big square with a screen in the middle surrounded by 2x4s. So it's like a 2x4 square, the screen in the center. And we just put that screen on top of a wheelbarrow and shovel the rock from the 0 to 5 foot zone over that, and it catches the pine needles. If you live in Tahoe, because this is for our house we own in Tahoe that we do it, at the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency has some of these screened squares that you can check out and use on your own property. So you don't have to build one, because they require that you keep that 0 to 5 foot zone clear of any debris. So it is a headache, but that's a solution that we have found that is moderately a pain, but it works.
how often are you doing this?
We try to do it annually.
So
In the
once a year, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Great
Um,
recommendation. Had no idea.
yeah, thanks for that. I
And by
didn't have an
we, I
idea.
mean, yeah, usually my husband does it. I don't tend to do it, but so I don't want to take the credit. But he seems to be able to get it done over a weekend of time around a house that's 1,200 square feet. So
Great, thanks.
Okay. This individual, this is related to the steel metal siding recommendations that you just gave. Can you provide written source with more detailed instructions? How to place that steel metal siding over the existing wood siding? Steve, would it be okay if I ask this individual just to email me and then I can forward on to you?
Yes,
Yeah. So again, email us lwf@unr.edu with that question. I can forward it on to Steve and then he can get those instructions. Okay. Next one. My neighbor's house is 25 feet from mine. We have a wooden fence on the boundary about halfway between the buildings. Should I be concerned about one house igniting the other?
I think the answer is yes. Your neighbor could ignite your house and vice versa. The 25 feet is sort of right in the margin. I mean, I've observed in some post-fire things that I've been involved with that 30 to 35 feet is definitely possible to have home-to-home fire spread. You need to be sort of 50-ish before you can be sort of certain that you're far enough away. The wooden fence will serve as a radiant barrier until that wooden fence ignites and burns down, and then it's no longer helpful. A metal fence in place of the wooden fence would be a better radiant shield, so to speak, from one house to the other. If you're worried about your house igniting more than just focusing on your house for a minute, you can look at stand in your house and look over, and if you have windows in the way, you can harden your windows with tempered glass. If you don't have tempered glass already, you can work on a shield for your windows. If your under eave area could be boxed in, that would make it more durable. If you have combustible siding, you can sort of consider things you might do there. for siding just on that exposure, that side. And you could talk to your neighbor maybe about putting a corrugated roofing vertically, attaching it to that wooden fence, for example, and that might provide additional protection from the radiant energy from that burning house. But I think the bottom line is your neighbor could be the cause of the ignition of your house. And so sharing, sharing common interests with your neighbor and both of you doing all you can to minimize the chance of either house igniting, would be worth a glass of wine or two in conversation.
Yeah, that glass of wine or two is important in there. Okay, do you recommend using fire retardant foams on the home?
So by fire retardant foam, I'm going to assume you're talking about a fire retardant gel. A gel is something that sticks better to vertical surfaces, and it's the thing that's used as something you might do when you're evacuating, as opposed to a foam you're putting on an active fire. A gel, it's a precautionary thing that you're doing in anticipation of. So there's been some research on the performance of gels, and similarly there's been some research done on the performance of longer term intumescent coatings, and both of them don't really last a long time. They don't really last as long as you might want them to last. So a gel is going to be pretty much done in 3 hours or so. And so if you're applying a gel before you're evacuating, you're likely going to be long gone, and that 3 hours is likely going to be long past that time. So I'm not a big advocate for homeowner application of gel products, just because I think, and so we call those kind of things active mitigation strategies. So they're active in the sense that you need to do them, and then they're good for a short amount of time. The purpose of active strategies is that they are only good for a short amount of time. A passive strategy, you do it and you can walk away from it, and with sort of minimal maintenance, it's going to be good for a long time. So changing to non-combustible siding, doing this non-combustible zone, that's considered passive things because you can do them and then forget about it. Active strategies, they're not intended to be long-term. I think a gel is just too short of a term for a homeowner to rely on. So I would not rely on a gel as an approach to save the house. It just leads to a short discussion on exterior sprinkler systems, which might well come up in this conversation. And some of those exterior sprinkler systems can have an additive added to them that could be a foam. Then they would be something that would be on. There are some issues with these kind of systems also. So, I would urge you to rely as much as possible on passive strategies. These are things you do to your property and your home that you could do and you maintain, as opposed to do immediately before you might be leaving or being evacuated.
Good point. This is kind of related to the sprinkler system. I'm wondering whether an above ground or in-ground pool would theoretically harden the home or property.
So the pool would, it does lead directly to an exterior sprinkler system. Those sprinkler systems, if you're going to go down that route, there's things you want to make sure. One is that you have a standalone water system that can be the pool, and the other is that it can operate with the power in the area out. So you have sort of a standalone water system and a standalone power or delivery system. There are issues with sort of unknowns with exterior sprinkler systems that would apply to this pool idea, and that is where to put them, and then you want to have one that cycles, and then how to turn them on. If you're not there, how do you turn them on? There are some commercial products that you can turn on remotely. If you have a do-it-yourself one, you know, you need to be sort of savvy to be able to turn it on remotely. The other benefit potentially for a pool is that, particularly if you're in a rural area, is that your local fire department can know that you have this extra water supply. And you know, if you are in a rural area, you want to make sure that your fire department knows that you have this water supply that they can tap into. That would be the other potential benefit for that kind of a system.
Okay, we got a question about a question for renters. We're trying to work with undocumented individuals, and they are concerned about mentioning hazards to their landlords in the fear of getting evicted.
You know, this is just an area that I have no experience in. I would I appreciate the question, but I don't know that I can offer any kind of useful advice on this one.
I don't know either. I don't know how to answer that.
Christine, I think, has something she might want to say.
Do you want to add anything to that, Amanda? I know you guys have put together a renter's guide. And so at least there is a resource now that we can point to.
Yeah, so the renter's guide will be coming out in the next month or so. Unfortunately, it doesn't have anything specific to undocumented individuals and how to, you know, bring up those conversations with landlords when there's a fear of being evicted. But there is like information on just like, you know, that you should look at your lease with your landlord and know like what's your responsibility versus what's your landlord's responsibility. But that's a really interesting question in terms of like, how do folks who are undocumented bring up those concerns with that fear? And I personally don't know the answer to that, but I'll definitely keep that in mind as we sort of move along with this resource.
And I would also just add, I mean, it seems to me that fear of being asked to leave your home could be for anybody that lives in the home, not just if you are an undocumented individual. So just make, you know, how do renters kind of broach the conversation, you know, of, well, we need some work to be done about fire safety around our home and the home itself, especially in places like Tahoe or in the mountains in the Sierra Nevadas where there are no rentals. They're so limited that you kind of can take what you can get. And so that's kind of a hard place for the renters to be in, to be asking for the changes to occur.
Totally.
Thanks, guys, for your input. Okay, kind of related to the flame resistant treatments. This person says, I get a lot of questions about flame resistant chemical treatments. How effective are they, and how often do they need to be reapplied or re-wetted?
Okay, so I think, so I'll take this as two questions. One about gels again in terms of re-wetting, because a gel is a long chain polymer that can hold a lot of water. And so really, when you apply a gel to a home, you're just putting a lot of water on the home in a way that it can sort of stay put against the side of the house, for example. And then that gel loses its effectiveness as the water dehydrates, as the water leaves because it's warm out or it's windy and warm. So if you can spray a fine mist on that, then you can do what's called rehydrating that gel product, and it can become better again at resisting the fire, because you have a lot of water that needs to be evaporated before it can get to the thing that the gel is stuck to, like your siding. So if a homeowner is doing this, a homeowner is likely gone, evacuated. Once they apply the gel, they're gone. And because they're gone, and the likelihood of a firefighter being at your house to rehydrate is not so likely. That's one reason why I just don't think it's a viable option. There are these third-party fire crews that are sometimes hired by an insurance company, as an example, and they apply gels, but they are focused on a few houses in an area. They can come back and rehydrate the gel. So I don't. I think if we're talking about a third-party entity doing the gel treatment, then it's a sort of a different scenario than a homeowner doing the treatment. So I think there can be some effectiveness in rehydrating. It's just if there's somebody there to do it. So that's the gel part. But the other way that you can interpret the question you asked is about a coating, an intumescent coating. And these are intended to be long-term, arguably as long as the paint cycle on your house. There has been, again, some research on these kind of coatings, and these are called intumescent coatings for the most part, because when they get hot, they swell up and they basically provide an insulating layer for the thing that they're stuck to. So typically you're going to apply this to a combustible siding product. And then this insulating layer is going to protect that product from the heat. And if it activates, then you're going to be replacing that thing, the siding. Some vents that are flame and ember resistant vents have an intumescent product in them. And if that product activates in the vent, then you will be replacing that vent. But the argument is you definitely are far more happy replacing your vent compared to your house, and similarly more willing to be replacing siding versus your house. So the vent is sort of a separate thing. If we're talking about paint coating for your house, there has been 2 research projects done, one by IBHS and a collaborator at University of North Carolina at Charlotte, and a similar study done by researchers at NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, the federal entity. Both studies found that these kind of coatings aren't really, they don't last a long time. And so even though the documents that you read the manufacturer might say it's good for 5 years, as an example, we found both entities found that they were not really good for much more than a year. So you don't want to be repainting your house every year for this kind of thing. So they're not really a viable option right now. There are companies out there that would really like to have that business, and arguably painting your house to provide fire resistance is cheaper than the cheapest way to do it compared to replacing siding everywhere. But right now that technology isn't present. I think there are some companies that are evaluating the use of a normal kind of paint film on top of the intumescent coating, as opposed to the intumescent coating being the most outermost part of the system. I think this is the way that the products will work, is that you're going to have an intumescent coating with a top coat of something else that protects an intumescent coating. And we'll see if that plays out as the way to work. For, I would say right today, you don't have an option for an intumescent coated product that provides long-term performance in an outside environment. These coatings are used pretty often in an interior application where you don't have sun and you don't have a lot of moisture cycling that you have outside. It's these external things, the sun and the moisture cycling of the siding, that really makes these products degrade quicker than you want them to.
So this kind of falls in line with what we're talking about. So this individual has a cedar deck as well as a cedar siding. Are there any coatings that can be used to reduce the risk of ignition? And I would also add, what if their deck is covered so that it doesn't receive any moisture, doesn't receive any sun?
So my take on it after doing research in this area for a number of years is I don't rely on a coating to provide enhanced protection, and I don't worry about a coating making the product more vulnerable. Putting a coating on a deck is it's because you have a coating on a horizontal surface. It receives a lot of mechanical wear, walking, moving of furniture and the like. That makes it's a hard place for a coating to have a long-term performance anyway. So I wouldn't rely on a coating here, or for the siding either. I would do these what we call the passive strategies, where you remove debris from under the deck. You have a non-combustible zone there. You do the same thing on your siding, and you take care of a defensible space in terms of veg management and the like, so that fire itself and embers can't threaten the home.
This individual has heard a bit about fire blankets for an entire home. It can be deployed in the threat of a wildfire before evacuation. They referenced an article from the businessinsider.com. Do they work? Where can you get them?
They can work. And where you get them, there's a couple of commercial products. I can't really tell you right off the top, but if you Google or do a web search on foil products or house wraps for wildfire, I'm sure you'll come up with those. Before you do that, I would, if you again send a note, and I'll give you the reference, but there has been some research on the performance of these. This again was done a number of years ago at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. And they can work, but you can have a fire that is too big. And so if you really want to rely only on this wrap, then you can be in trouble, because the foil is typically sort of foil-based things, and they are foil attached something to another material, and these materials under extreme heat can delaminate, and then the wrap becomes ineffective. So you need to you can use these, and it's hard to argue that they won't help, but if you rely only on these and expect them to protect you from whatever, then you're likely to be disappointed because of this delamination process that will basically make that particular wrap ineffective at the end of the day.
This individual says, I know that fire vents are good for the attic and foundation vents, but what do you recommend for dryer vent and exhaust vent protection? I think I remember you saying flap vents. Are they recommended?
Well, yes, I think you want a non-combustible plate, so a metal plate, and you want it to be just a flat plate that covers the outlet, and you want it has to be light enough metal, so that it can be opened with the pressure from the outlet of the dryer when the dryer is working. You only want it to be open when the dryer is working, and you want it to be closed when the dryer is not working. So these are around, there must be a brand name for them, but I think if you go to the hardware store, these are sort of commonly used things, and you just want it to be a metal plate that opens when the when the dryer is on. There are another location, if you have like a gas furnace or a gas hot water heater as an example, in a room inside your house, then you will have openings in your siding that provides makeup air for these gas burning appliances. And you can use these same kind of fire and ember resistant vents and those locations also. So, you know, attic, crawl space, and in these locations where you're just having air enter because the gas appliance is using air as it does its thing.
And so along the idea of vents, please discuss the best approaches to attic ventilation, including ridge vents.
So vents in attics, they perform a moisture management function. So you need to have air circulating to eliminate or reduce the buildup of moisture in the attic. In order for this to happen, you have nominally inlet vents, and these are in the under eave area, and you have nominally outlet vents, and these are in the roof or in the gable end wall of your home. So, and then with regard to roof vents that are the nominal outlet air vents, you can have a ridge vent or an off-ridge through roof vent. You don't need to have all three of these kinds. You typically you'll have under eave vents for the inlet, and then you'll have vents in one other location, either off-ridge, through roof, or ridge, or gable end to get the outlet air part. So there are a number of vendors of flame and ember resistant vents that make their product for these locations. The exception is the ridge vent in terms of the common flame and ember resistant vents haven't been converted into a ridge vent, but you can get these vents for every other location. For a ridge vent, we did some research at IBHS on the ember entry part of a ridge vent, and the ridge vents that were rated for wind-driven rain worked well for ember resistance. I think that the thing that we need to keep in mind when we're talking about wildfire versus rain is that often ridge vents are plastic, and often, and these ridge vents that are good for rain, they have these external baffles. So they like these vertical legs on the outside of the ridge vent. And so wind, rain, and embers have to go up over this baffle to get into the attic space, and that really makes it so they can't get into the attic space because of what wind does, that are carrying these particles, whether it be a rain particle, so to speak, or an ember particle. So if you're going to do a ridge vent, then I would suggest that you choose a non-combustible, so a metal ridge vent that has this external baffle. There's at least one manufacturer of such a product. It's a Lomanco. It's built, and the company is in Arkansas, but if Lomanco is a product that you can get a metal ridge vent that has these external baffles. And if you want a ridge vent, I would go that way. The plastic baffles can be vulnerable to ignition because often you'll have debris accumulating at that ridge vent inlet, and embers will ignite that debris, and you have flaming exposure to the plastic vent. If it's just an ember thing, you're okay. But because of the propensity for embers for debris to accumulate at the ridge vent inlet, you know, I don't suggest using a plastic ridge vent.
Okay. There was a deck question I missed. What is the preferred material for decks?
So decks are, I think we know a lot more about decks than we did a few years ago. California has a particular test that deck board has to pass in order to be used in the state. I'm pretty sure that the building code on the northern, on the Nevada side basically has the same requirement. And it's an under deck flame test. So that's the only thing that a deck board has to do to be approved for use in, let's say, Northern Nevada and in California. When you think about a deck, though, there are two kinds of exposures that a deck can experience. So the deck, if your home is threatened by a wildland fire, your home will see embers, and your deck has to be able to resist embers. The other thing that it can see is flames from the underside. But if you've done a really good job in your defensible space so that the likelihood of flames touching the bottom of your deck is minimal, and so this would be creating a non-combustible zone under the deck. You don't store your wood pile under your deck. You don't store other combustibles under, you don't store lumber under your deck, for example. Then you only need to worry about embers. And if it's strictly an ember exposure that you have to worry about, then higher density products work well. So the wood plastic composites, or the plastic composite decks, you know, they perform well from an ember exposure. Tropical hardwood such as Ipe performs well. The product that is most vulnerable to ember ignitions are the medium density softwoods, and around here that would be redwood and cedar. They're the ones that are most vulnerable. So if you're building a deck and you want to minimize a chance of ember ignition, then you know, use a higher density product, or you can go to a non-combustible product such as a lightweight concrete. But those kind of decks are expensive, both because of the materials and because of the engineering you need to do, because they're just heavier. So the higher density products, if you have a deck existing, then you know, we talk about that non-combustible zone right next to at the deck to wall, at your deck, where your deck connects to your home, where you remove a deck board and put a non-combustible product there for a deck board or two. And I would suggest that if you have an existing deck that is otherwise in pretty good condition.
We have about 6 more questions, and we're about 18 minutes away from ending. There was a question about propane tanks. I heard there is a way to make the hose exposed on propane tank that carries product into ground line less vulnerable to ember ignition. Can you give a suggestion on how to be proactive with this issue?
So I think the way to be proactive with a propane tank is to create defensible space around it, create its own defensible space. The problems with propane tanks are them getting hot enough that they explode, and you need sort of a sustained heat source there. The ember ignition part for a hose, I mean, you could wrap it in foil. You could, the ones that I've seen, you know, you can have just a metal delivery system. I would focus on creating defensible space around the tank so that an extended radiant heat is not possible, and flame contact isn't possible because of what you've done in terms of veg management. You can build a wall, a concrete block wall around some sides of it. When you do that, then you might tend to, it would be a place where material debris can accumulate. So it would be a maintenance thing on you to clean that out every now and then. But you've probably observed that you have a number of maintenance things when you're protecting your house from fire.
Are there consultants or contractors in Mono County, California, who can provide an assessment, provide recommendations, and oversee home hardening projects? How do we find them? are there certifications? After you talk, I'll add to that too.
So I would, I don't know about Mono County. I would suggest that you contact your University of California Cooperative Extension Office and ask for what might be available locally. I know I live in Northern California, and our Fire Safe Council offers classes to contractors and also to vegetation type companies that on wildfire issues, and they'll put their name on the Fire Safe Council website, and as having attended such a class, and it gives the homeowners some comfort that the vendor knows something about what they're doing. I'm pretty sure Mono County doesn't do that, but the Cooperative Extension personnel in the county might know of options that might be present there. I just don't know there. And so Jamie, you want to add some things?
Yeah, just in regards, I'm not sure about Mono County or California, but just in regards to Nevada residents, actually the Living with Fire program is going to be working on some sort of like contractors certification. We will, provide them training, and then we'll have a list of these people, because we see that there's this huge need for this. Unfortunately, because we're with the university, we're unable to give recommendations for that, because we're not allowed to recommend one company or consultant over another. But as far as Nevadans, we're working on that. We recognize there's a need, and we're working on that. Okay, let me get to some other questions. Let's get in. I have a few neighbors with dead trees, overgrown yards, and a dense bush tree that is within 5 feet of my roof.
Oh no.
We lost Jamie.
We lost somebody. Yeah.
Are you able to hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. I'll ask you questions until she comes back.
Okay.
How effective are products like Chemco, Chemco, compared with other siding options?
So Chemco is a manufacturer of an exterior rated fire retardant chemical. And so Chemco itself provides the fire retardant chemical that would be treated, that a siding product, for example, or a decking product, as an example, would be treated with. These are pressure impregnated materials, and typically they go through a different heat process after the pressure impregnated chemical in process to fix the chemical in the product. So we've done some research on these things from an ember resistance perspective. I think they work well. I think and we've also done some tests of these products in siding, and they definitely help the product, particularly if flames are going to be touching it. I think the challenge for you will be that the types of products that you might want are limited. The types of products that are available are limited. So you can get a deck board, for example, and you can get one particular kind of lap siding product. But if you want a fancy pattern in your siding product, you likely won't be able to get it. So there are two options out there, Chemco and Hoover, and they are two companies that sort of compete for the same market. They have to pass the same kind of tests So I think you can be indifferent there in terms of what you want. I think that the issue is, and I think all of these would likely be a special order. You're not going to walk into a lumber yard and get them right away. You'd have to order it, and you have to sort of be willing to wait, and you will be paying a premium for that service.
Great. Hi, Jamie, welcome back. I just asked him more questions on the list.
Awesome. Thanks. I don't know what questions we asked.
I only asked one, and it's not one I had sent to you yet, so
Okay.
you're good.
I don't know if you had heard me, Steve, or answered this question. This individual is from Mono County, California. They have a few neighbors with dead trees and overgrown yards and a dense tree bush that is within 5 feet of their roof. What can they do if the homeowner is unwilling to do any work on it?
I don't know what they can do. I would suggest they talk to their local fire department. I don't know what else. I think it's something that many individuals face when you have a neighbor that isn't cooperating. You know, I would make sure that I've done what I can do on my property, so that a finger can't be pointed back at me. But if you've tried the discussion, the only thing I can think of recommending is talking to your local fire department.
Good advice. When asked whether or not to string 4-inch trim, let me read this. When asked whether or not to string trim 4 feet tall perennial bunch grasses within the home ignition zone 1. So anyway, I tried to make it short, but now it's not making sense. This individual said that they had a question from a homeowner the other day, and they'd like to know what you think about this individual's response. So when this individual was asked whether or not to string trim 4 feet tall perennial bunch grass within the home ignition zone 1, I said interrupting the vertical continuity of grass was better and would keep flame lengths shorter. The homeowner was concerned about trimming the grass would kill it, and when it dried, it would be more flammable than standing alive. Any thoughts?
Let's see. I wonder whether I can read that my own self.
I will send that to you.
So vertical continuity is important, and so if you don't have it, then that's okay. Thanks. When asked whether or not to string trim for string trim, and I don't really know what that means, but 4 feet tall perennial bunch grass. So HIZ1 is, so I would say HIZ1, depending on how you are defining it, and I think it's getting a little bit more complicated these days, is when you say 1, is that 0 to 30 feet, or are you considering 1 to be 5 feet to 30 feet? In terms of the grass was better. So so I don't know that trimming the grass would kill it. I guess it depends on the kind of grass, but typically the meristematic part of the grass is at the bottom. So when you cut it, it would keep on growing.
Hey, Steve, this is Zach.
Hi, Zach.
Sorry to sorry to sideline you. I didn't mean to ask a confusing question, but the gist of it is that the homeowner was concerned that this tall perennial bunch grass, that killing it would make it more flammable. By having it on the ground, I said that the flame lengths would be shorter and that they would be adding protection to their home by getting that material, that flammable material, down onto the ground. Even though it would be drier, that it was better to have it on the ground than standing. And that's the gist of the question, sir.
So I think that's you're correct in that. Why don't you just get rid of the dead stuff on the ground? Just remove it.
Yeah, rake it after cutting.
Right. Yeah.
I'll follow up with the person that asked that question with, remove the dead and down material after it's been cut.
Right. Yeah. But so your take, I think, is correct now that I sort of have talked to you.
Gotcha. Thank you. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Thanks, Zach, for adding that. Okay, this individual says, do you know if artificial grass is flammable? I have a fake lawn that is directly next to the house. Is that a concern?
So this is like artificial turf, I think we're talking about. I've done, a long time ago, I did an experiment on artificial turf, and I have to sort of preface this by saying it was one brand. And I think the types of plastic that can be in artificial turf can vary. But this particular brand, it was, and this was strictly from an ember exposure. It was a lot of smoldering, but it never transitioned to flaming. So I think you can expect a lot of smoldering should you have this artificial turf. And I think the thicker the weave, or the thicker the mat, the more likely it is that you would have ignition. And the other thing that struck me is that if you have debris accumulating within that, then like needle and whatnot, needle and leaf debris, then it could be problematic. So left by its own, if it's well maintained and only itself, then you can expect a lot of smoldering. If you have a lot of debris on it, then and flames might touch this plastic, then I think you can expect a lot of burning, a lot of flaming. So for you, I would treat this like other combustibles, and I would, where it approaches a home or your exterior wall, I would try to remove it and put a non-combustible thing in its place.
This person says, I know hardening home strategies can never reduce the risk 100%, but with the nature of these fires, the Creek Complex, Dixie Paradise being so hot, do we have any chance implementing these strategies? What process do you go through to evaluate the cost versus risk reduction in deciding what and how far to go with these strategies?
I mean, yeah, that's the question, I think. And, we've been talking a fair amount about things that you can do to minimize ember ignition. But the fact of the matter is that if your neighbor is close by and that neighbor's home ignites, then it's no longer an ember threat. It is radiant heat and flames. And during a wildland fire with the high winds, flames can be bent, so to speak, into a neighboring house that's close by. I think it has to involve sort of community efforts, because in communities, home-to-home fire spread is such a possibility. The wildfires that we remember as sort of normal people are the ones where a lot of homes are burned. And when a lot of homes burn, inevitably, it's because there's a lot of home-to-home fire spread. It's no longer an ember. I mean, it can be sort of ember driven, but but radiant heat and flames are really right up there in terms of spread scenarios. So I think that there are solutions. I mean, I think the only thing is that these aren't inexpensive solutions at the end of the day. And if you have neighbors that are close by, it does require a lot of collaboration with neighbors. But also, I think we need to then use options that are where non-combustible is the thing that we use, and not some of these other pathways for compliance. Like when your neighbor's far away, wood siding isn't necessarily always such a bad thing if you have done all these other things to minimize ember ignition potential. But when your neighbor's really close by, you know, and then non-combustible seems to be the way to go, and other things to minimize the chance of spread. So more protection for window, for example. Definitely these flame and ember resistant vents become just more important in the scheme of things. So the cost benefit, this is always difficult. I think it's really hard for me, at least, to give a cost benefit or you know, a bang for the buck kind of approach generically. I think people that walk onto a property can give you a ranking of things that you should do first, given your scenario. I think that the difficulty is making this sort of generic blanket application apply for everybody, because everybody's property is a little bit different in terms of proximity to neighbors, slope, vegetation on the ground, other things like that, which makes this, your question about cost benefit or bang for the buck kind of things to do, I think it just makes it harder. And so that's, I think, frustrating for you, I'm pretty sure, sort of frustrating for me, but I think that's where we are right now, and our understanding of this particular issue.
You know what, Steve, it's actually 1 o'clock and I didn't run the post-workshop poll. Would it be okay? We actually have like 4 more questions. Would it be okay if I run this poll and then ask a few more questions?
Sure, definitely.
Okay, I'm going to launch the poll for folks to please complete. It really helps us out with reporting and lets us know what you learned, whether or not this was useful. Next question. Is it true that ginkgo trees are fire resistant? In Japan, ginkgo are planted as street trees. Hold on a second. For fire prevention. Is it good for defensible space?
So hardwoods in general are considered less vulnerable than you know, pine trees and other softwoods. But I think you still need to worry about the same kind of things. You want to make sure they're limbed up. A dead ginkgo leaf that, you know, falls en masse into gutters or near your home can be just as much of a threat via ember ignition as others. So I would say that's sort of generally true, but there are these other gotchas that you need to pay attention to.
This person says, I feel that most of California native plants are very fragrant. Theoretically, are they high in oil? Is it safe to plant California natives in the defendable space?
So the things that we smell, those are the volatiles, and definitely volatiles make the plant more combustible, because volatiles are that. If I'm looking at this kind of woody vegetation, you know, I think you don't want them near your home. You don't want them in the 5-foot zone, but I would look inside them to see how much dead materials in there, because the dead sort of means very low moisture content, and typically that, and particularly if you have fine fuels that are dead, that's very combustible, and I think that would outweigh any kind of contribution from the volatiles that might be present. So look for the dead inside, maintain that, and woody vegetation near your home is particularly the kind that has a lot of dead inside of them. It's just not a good idea.
Have you seen better performance from a Chemco or Hoover treated siding over plywood versus untreated siding over 5/8 of an inch drywall?
Okay, this is a good one. So just read it one more time for me.
Have you seen better performance from a Chemco or Hoover treated siding over plywood versus untreated siding over 5/8 of an inch drywall? I'll send it to you too.
Okay, so we're basically this question is whether something that which would be referred to as a 1 hour wall construction. So that would be the drywall with plywood over top of it. So that's sort of considered a 1 hour fire construction versus a fire retardant treated product. So I'd say that pretty clearly from a fire penetration perspective, from fire going from one side of from the fire side of the wall to the non-fire side of the wall, so burning from the outside to the inside of your house, the 1 hour construction is better. I think the thing you need to worry about with these kind of questions is that fire spread on the wall, so like vertically upward or laterally across, they can be problematic because they'll carry fire to another part of the wall that might be more vulnerable. So fire going up the wall will get to the undereave area, for example, and then the undereave would be the vulnerability, not the wall itself in terms of fire burning from the outside to the inside. Similarly, it could burn to a window and break the glass in the window. So these questions on the face of it, it's pretty straightforward that the 1 hour construction is better than the fire retardant treated options. But the fire retardant treated options provide flame spread. They provide benefits from a vertical and lateral flame spread perspective. And these products haven't really been shown to do so well from a fire penetration perspective. They're not really meant to do that. So I'll try to summarize. From a fire penetration perspective, the system the assembly that has the gypsum wallboard in it is better. From a flame spread over the wall perspective, it depends on what that outermost product is, regardless. And so it could be the gypsum one, but it could also be the fire retardant treated one. It would depend on what the product on the gyp system would be. But you're not going to get a lot of fire resistance benefit from the treated wood one. Sorry, it's not a straightforward answer, but it's not a straightforward answer.
Thanks, Steve. I'm going to end this poll. One quick final question. Are dead trees very dry a fire hazard?
Yes.
So thank you so much for coming and answering all these amazing questions. I know every time I attend one of these, I learn something new, which is awesome. If anybody has any questions, you can always email us at lwf@unr.edu. Thank you again. Thanks for sticking around, and I hope you guys have a great one.
Yeah, thanks so much for the opportunity, and thanks all for your questions also.